So welcome to, what is it? Is it March? End of February, start of March. It's March. This is the second Q&A of the year, considering that we didn't do it at the start of January. But it's also the monthly opportunity to jump in on the Mood Prep online group and to jump in and be involved in the book club, which is every 2 months, have some input in relation to what we're reading and what we're encouraging people to sort of pointing them towards in relation to education. And then also getting here and ask some questions with anything from the podcast that we've covered this week, this month, but even other things that obviously come up for us when we're listening to the podcast. So sometimes it's not the podcast itself. Sometimes later on, the thought that we got from the podcast unveils another thought 4, 5, 6 hours later that wasn't actually related at all. And so that's the whole point of it, by the way. That's why I don't tell you what to think. And so making sure that this is the opportunity to bring it forward. And so my podcast this week on the importance of discussion really points to that, to allow people to get in here and pull things apart that are complex subjects. And the beauty of that is that we get to sit back and just press record and listen, and also gives everyone else that's not able to be here an opportunity to listen back to it as well. So that's the utility of this once a month, and it's the first Sunday of every month. Is that correct, Courtney?
Something like that.
Something like that. Courtney is the left-hand woman helping that. I shouldn't assume. Helping that sort of making sure it does happen as well, which is I'm very grateful for. So thank you very much. To start off with, we do have a few things to go through today. We've got the book review. We've got some questions that Courtney posted in there. We're looking at what the next book is. From there, we're going to open up a bit of Q&A around this month's podcast and other stuff that has come up for you. I've got a couple of points I'd like to talk to, and then we're just going to pretty much wrap it up and talk about the Mood Prep Intensive. The only other thing that I want to point at is the Coaches Circle, which has been an extension of effectively the Mood Prep podcast, but which involves a weekly webinar, educational webinar, and also one-on-one coaching throughout the month. That's changed. It's now called the Roundtable. That'll change over the next 2 weeks, just depending on my graphic designer and juggling his 2 kids, one of which is 4 weeks old. So, and when I called him last week, he's like, I got to go. My sewer just burst. So he's literally in shit. So we'll see when that changes as it is. But to start off, the book in question is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I think all three of you have said you read it. Courtney, you said you read 3 pages and got the gist of it.
3/4 of it.
3/4 of it. Very good. So you read 7 pages.
There we go.
Yeah. Fantastic. Barry, I remember having a few conversations with you about The War of Art.
Yep.
And Maddie, you mentioned that you read it before as well. So what we're going to be doing is just run through 4 questions, and we'll take the first question, then each one of us will basically contribute from that question, our answer to it, and then go from there. We've got about, I would say about 2 minutes, give or take. If somebody's got some good content in what they're putting to the table, I'm not going to cut them off specifically at 2 minutes, but I'd like to keep it kind of short, myself included, to that as well. So, Barry, to get started,
yeah,
Courtney has the first question for you.
What was your biggest takeaway from this book, Barry?
Well, the one thing that's stuck in my mind, and it's been a while since I've read it, and unfortunately I've lent the book to our youngest son, who hasn't sent it back to me yet, so I haven't been able to go through it again. But the one thing I thought was persistence. And the one part that stuck in my mind was when Stephen Pressfield, took a script to a producer, and the producer, when he was pitching his script, the producer spent probably 50-60% of the time on the phone. The producer finally said to him, "Would you mind waiting outside until I take this call?" He waited outside for about 2 hours, and then the producer walked out, pulling his coat on, and basically said, "Oh, look, I'm sorry, I forgot all about you. You'll have to reschedule." So it's probably the hardest thing that could happen to someone like that, and yet it didn't stop him persisting with his needs or what he wanted to do with his writings. So I guess that persistence was the one thing that came out to me mostly.
Great. Yep. And have you seen that more opportunities of that in your life since sort of having that stand out more?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think it's not to be, not to feel that you've tried and trying's good enough, and if it doesn't work, try something else. If you want something to work, I think you've just got to keep at it, keep working at it.
Great. And what about yourself, Courtney? What was your biggest takeaway from the book?
Probably when he talks about the more something means to you, the greater the resistance you'll feel towards doing it. That for me was the biggest point I kept taking from it.
And why do you think that is?
Probably because I found that the most useful to implement, which sort of comes in with further questions, and that's something like, I know something means a lot to me, so I'll sit here and I'll be needing to go for a training run, per se, and I'll really not want to do it. And the more I sort of feel I don't want to do it, the more I sort of think, well, no, this is something I actually really need to do. So I found that stuck out to me multiple times throughout the book, and I think because it's something I was able to see and implement.
Okay, so you found utility, like real life utility for it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. What about yourself, Matthew?
For me, it was more that there's always going to be resistance in one form or another. So, like, not to take it personally that something's not going your way, that it'll be there in some form no matter what. So just to keep working through it, regardless of what the resistance is. I've read a lot of Stoic stuff lately, so I'm probably putting a bit of that into it too. But to control what you can control, like there's only so many things within your sphere of control. So if there's resistance that isn't necessarily something you can change immediately, then just keep working and focusing on what you can control yourself.
How long ago did you read the book?
More than 12 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And so was that when first reading that, was that a newer concept for you? Was that, or is it something that you heard before but it made more sense?
It made more sense reading it in that way, like the way that he described different types of resistance, like resistance showing up as certain things. Obviously, not everything's going to be easy. Anything that you try and do, like my progress through my career wasn't easy, and there was always resistance there, but it was never like pointed out that those things are resistance and it's normal and it's always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just having something succinct and written down and actually reading it and understanding that it's just always going to be there and it's something you have to accept, it just made a lot of sense.
Okay, great. Very good. So my contribution would be quite similar to Courtney's, around the idea that the more that you feel resistance, it's usually pointing at something that's most important to you, be it a discussion or a workplace development, asking somebody out. It could be anything. That was one thing, but rather than just piggybacking off that, I want to point at something else, and that would be that the resistance that you feel isn't your identity. Was something that I kind of would have cloudy, vaguely had before, but the idea that, for example, I am not a procrastinator. And so when sort of sensing this resistance that Stephen talked about in the book, it allowed this idea that we can separate ourselves from the procrastination, to see it as resistance, as one of the forms of resistance, as opposed to going, I am a procrastinator, and owning and becoming the resistance itself. So that was one of the things that I kind of got from that as well, is that he painted it in a beautiful way to be able to see resistance as something that arises rather than something that we are. And so in being able to see that allows us to disidentify as it and then work through it, as opposed to it clouding all of our, becoming personal, pervasive, and permanent. So that was my takeaway from the book. Very good. Great. Second question, Courts. Barry, you're up.
So question 2 is, after reading The War of Art, are you able to identify moments in your life when you've been affected by resistance? And when was this?
That's you, Barry.
Yeah. No, nothing on that at this stage, I'm afraid. I haven't had time to think about it.
It's okay. You'll have 4 minutes. And if something pops up, great. And if something doesn't, great.
Yep.
Courtney.
For me, the biggest one I was able to sort of pull out was when I was in a career, and I sort of, in a way, procrastinated about getting out of that career and changing to something else for quite a long time. But it was something I kept coming back to, and it almost felt like a bit of a barrier, but I'd always sort of distract myself from it or go off on something else, but then I'd circle back around to it. So it's probably one of the bigger examples I can think of where resistance was showing up in multiple different forms, through distractions or procrastination or reasoning why I shouldn't do it and justifying why I was staying where I was and all sorts of different things.
And was this occurring, the awareness before or after the War of Art, or during?
No, it was, after reading the book, I could sort of look back and see what was happening there.
Okay. Yeah. Great. And has that helped you be able to identify when that's occurring again?
Well, I've only just read the book, so
right.
We'll see. I would think so.
Possibly. Yeah. Fantastic. Maddie?
For me, it's probably more recently just being more conscious of just what I'm doing, essentially, instead of just being passive, which is something I've really worked on. For me, it's more like my work, so outside of the gym. So being with clients and whatnot, I don't find any real resistance there. Like, it's a lot of things I'm able to work through. It's more the everything else, like the upkeep of the business, calling leads, keeping track of finances. It's like once I'm done with clients or like I've finished my gym session, like my own workout, the last thing I want to do is sit down and do businessy type things. I'd rather just read or watch videos or listen to a podcast. So I notice those little things where I'm like, I have this work that I should be doing. Like I should chase these leads. Like I just got 3 leads overnight. Like I need to call them. I was like, I'd rather just cook something for the next hour and sit and eat and watch a YouTube video. So I am recognizing more like little things like that, just on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, great. Very good. My response to the question is it would be in conjunction with reading The War of Art, but then also all of the study and the lessons and the models and all that sort of stuff that I've learned, especially over the last 2 years. But in conjunction of seeing this resistance occur, yeah, I mean, especially this last week, as I was pretty much in a room in Adelaide writing a book, and seeing the resistance show up and the ways that I would be able to distract myself and then almost justify the distraction was quite interesting. And it's very interesting seeing that. And I almost felt, and this is similar to other areas, whether it be in business or for discussions with people as well, although I'm very direct most of the time, I would almost feel in myself that I would revert back to a younger, less responsible version of myself, when effectively in avoidance of moving through the resistance that I was experiencing. So that was an interesting thing to not only observe, but then to really understand of myself. And so when I realized that that's once again not me, that it's simply me stepping consciously, whether I realize it or not, which sounds unconscious, but consciously choosing to step away from my potential. And which has absolutely no correlation to anything that I believe and love. So yeah, so that was probably my experience of resistance. Has anything come up for you, Barry?
Yes, it has. Yeah, look, I just need a minute or two to think about things. So
Sure.
the one thing that has come up is probably to do with ageism, and not so much what other people think, but more find as an excuse to not continue or not to go on with things or develop things. And I find when you get to a certain age, if you decide to do something a little bit different, you get some self-resistance coming in, and it might be a bit of maybe it's a guilt thing. That, oh, you know, what are you doing? What are you even thinking about doing this for? You know, you've done whatever you've done so far in your life. You're now a certain age. Why not just take it easy and not move on and start a new career and then start another business and just sort of keep going like you're a 30-year-old rather than a 60-year-old. So, yeah, there is some self-resistance, I think, there, and I think that book probably helped me and us to move through that and basically put it behind you and not worry about it. Just think, well, whatever comes. If you just try and keep working at things. Don't get too concerned about it if it doesn't work the way you thought it would.
Mm. Yep. Very good at leaning into your type 1-ness there.
Okay, right. Fair enough. Good.
Very good. Great input. What's next, Courts?
This sort of ties into some of the answers that have already been said in a way, but what have you learnt from this book that you can implement in the future to help yourself overcome that resistance?
We'll give you a break, Barry. Courtney, you can start.
Well, it's similar to what Maddie was saying earlier, actually, in that it's just knowing that resistance is always going to be there. And so to almost acknowledge it in a way, sort of identify that that's what it is, acknowledge it, and then move past it.
Okay. And when you say move past it, what would be a strategy for you to move past it?
Just get on and do the work, basically. Just do that task, whatever it is that you're feeling resistance towards.
Okay. Yep. Yep. Great. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's one of those things, and this is by absolutely no means discrediting what you're saying, because what you're saying is you're talking exactly to what the strategy is, because often a question can come up as like, but how do you do that? Like, well, you there's one way you don't do it, by sitting there and questioning how to do it. That's it. You get up and you do it. And so often might be some deeper reservations occurring for the individual, right? And such as perfectionism is an example of that. But it's hidden back here somewhere. People they may not know it's actually operating. I can't do it. It's like, what would you do if you could do anything? Is an easy question, so to speak, to just throw around. But people then would run through filters such as, what would my parents think of me? Or, does my partner, would they be okay with that? What would they, and like you start to see, and all these, once again, this is what we're going to go through heavily through the Mood Prep Intensive, but all these are frames that people then just get stuck on. And it's really quite fascinating seeing it. So, yeah, the actual answer is do the work, which I think is actually his second book.
Yeah, that's the title of his second book.
Yeah, I have read it. I should know, but and it really is. It's not, it is all for feeling. It's not about shutting that off, but it's do the work. So great, cool, Maddie. You got the question there?
No, my response would probably be pretty much the same. Like acknowledging that resistance is there, and working through it. Like just doing the work, taking control of what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you can't get rid of the resistance completely. Like, it'll be there. You do what you can to work through it.
Great. Yep. And what about yourself, Barry?
Yeah, pretty much the same. But mine's probably a bit more specific. Just ignore the resistance and don't try and be perfect.
Yep.
I've learned, perfect's a really, perfection's a really good get out. Great excuse to walk away from something.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's especially people that do score high in the type 1 within the Enneagram will struggle with that, and so, and then sometimes they'll fall into a habit of heavily judging their ability to not be perfect, as in trying to perfect not being perfect, and then judging themselves for it. It's quite, as amusing as it sounds, obviously it can be quite a restrictive. So that's good. My only input to add on to what you guys are talking about there would be to acknowledge it, but also to acknowledge where the resistance is coming from. So we can learn more about ourselves, but B, so we know what we need to address so that the resistance doesn't come up again later on in life. And so this feeds back into this idea of the object relations theory. And so let's say somebody has a frustration or a struggle with me. That's not my struggle. But B, it's probably their struggle with someone else in their life when they were younger that's just being represented as me. So the idea there is to not die. How's your ears there, Courts?
Oh, good. I just don't have very good earphones.
Right, okay. So the thing there is to be able to go, okay, well, if I'm to look inwards with this resistance, what meaning am I making about this resistance? And so the example of that is, well, if it's not perfect, what's the point of doing it? Like if those frames are coming up as the example, then yeah, for sure, there's, we can see it, but it just means that we're just going to keep seeing it unless we start dealing with the frames and the deeper meanings that we have. And so, and that's the whole benefit of coaching, right? And getting around a group of people like ourselves right now to be able to pull that. Welcome back, Maddie. It would have been way better if you just sort of popped up. I muted you. I got sick of hearing you die. There you go. You're back unmuted.
I was going to say I was trying to, but the lens is too wide. And as soon as I opened the door, I popped in the screen.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's the only thing that I'd add to it is that ability to then learn how to go deeper and find out what's really going on and where that's really coming from. Because it is a pattern. What I may feel resistance to, somebody else may not, and so where is that stemming from? So, yeah, great. Any input or additions to that, team? Delicious. What's your fourth question for us, Courts?
Fourth question was actually, did this book challenge your thinking? And if so, in what way? Now, I ended up putting this question up there because I read a couple of reviews on this book, and it was actually quite interesting that 50-50 was either people seem to love the book or people seem to really hate it. So I thought that was quite interesting, actually. So I thought I'd throw a question in there for those that maybe didn't find it, didn't resonate with it so much.
That's interesting, yeah.
And to be honest, I get as I say, I only made it 3/4 of the way through the book so far. We'll probably try and go back and read that last bit. And that's partly because, while I think he's got some good points, I think I can see how it's useful. I can see the value in the book. However, there are times where I think that resistance is useful. They say creativity comes from boredom, and if you take away boredom, you take away creativity.
Who's they?
I'm trying to think where I did read that. That may have been in that book Peak we were talking about earlier. May have been in there. Can't quite remember, but you need periods of boredom to inspire creativity. And so to be trying to stop procrastination all the time, to try and stop those distractions all the time, I don't think is helpful. I think sometimes there are cases where it's useful.
Okay. Yeah. And then I guess the other thing to speak to that is then, at what point does boredom turn into creativity? Because if you're being creative, then you're not being bored. And maybe is boredom then the precursor to creativity, right? And so, yeah, interesting sort of stuff. I really like that. That's good. I'm taking that as your input.
That was my input.
That was good. Mr. Barry, have you got something?
I don't think it challenged a lot. Gave me some insights, which I can't elaborate on right now, but I probably didn't get challenged so much. It was just, finding the insights from it a lot better than actually challenges.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Matthew?
Things I read it a while ago. It was at a point in my life when things weren't great. So it gave me a little bit of comfort knowing that resistance is always there. And it wasn't just me being shit. Like, there was aspects of that as well.
We've coached to this, Matthew.
But yeah, it gave me a little bit of comfort that, like, sometimes doing things is hard and there's a reason why. So it made me feel comforted in some regard, I guess. That's my memory of reading it anyway.
Great. Yeah. Would you, do you think if you get something different out of it if you read it again now?
Most likely, yeah. Yeah. So I'll possibly read it. I've got 3 books waiting after King, Warrior, Magician, Lover that I'd like to read first, but I might revisit it. It's only short, isn't it? It's like about 100 pages.
Yeah, I think there's maybe, well, I got it right here. It was about 120 from memory, give or take 20. So
170.
170, there you go.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other thing is that the types of pages are they're similar to the Daily Stoic, where some are full pages in what is an A5 page book, to some that are more like a third of the page. So yeah, it is a relatively shorter read. So
I have read Do the Work as well recently, like December, January. And I found it sort of reiterated a lot of stuff that I could remember from reading the other ones, the more of art. So
yep.
I don't know if I would read it again soon. I'd probably wait a while.
Okay.
Before I read it again, to be honest.
Yeah, cool. Very good. My answer to this book challenged my thinking. I don't think challenge would be the right word. What it did was allow me to create a better landscape of understanding of resistance. And because Stephen's traditionally a fiction writer, he's quite a good storyteller. So the enjoyment I get out of telling stories and fables and seeing that sort of stuff, it enabled me to, especially when looking at something like Angels and Muse, by personifying, that's the right word, personifying the type of resistance and the muse, so to speak, allowed me to try, like, sort of understand it a lot better rather than it simply just being in this subjective space. So I found the way that he communicated was by storytelling, which made the examples easier for me to consume. So that's the easiest way for me to explain it. Rather than challenging, it sort of contributed to the way that I see the landscape of it all. Any questions and thoughts come up for you guys with all those questions? No? Delicious. I have 3 things that I found from the book I'd like to share anyway. I sound like I'm coming from the Bible. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But these 3 things are, I mean, I could go through the whole book and continue to find more and more and more, no doubt. Some of these feel relevant for me right now, but there were 3 bits of gold, I suppose, that spoke to me that were pretty interesting. the first sort of thing is, what does resistance feel like? First, unhappiness. We feel like hell. Our low-grade misery pervades everything. We're bored. We're restless. We can't get no satisfaction, Rolling Stones. There's guilt, but we can't put our finger on the source. We want to go back to bed. We want to go up and party. We feel unloved and unlovable. We're disgusted. We hate our lives. We hate ourselves. There's a lot of painting and boredom and hating that, but I suppose there's definitely stages in my life where I've probably experienced all of those, more recently, some of the more latent ones, but the distraction's the biggest part of that. From there it goes unalleviated, resistance mounts. And so what I'm getting there is that there's this unaddressed, the resistance ends up becoming more than a molehill. It becomes a mountain to a pitch that becomes unendurable. At this point, vices kick in, and that's where he says dope, adultery, web surfing. I would say social media, extra training, cleaning the house could also all be parts of that, just different variations. And then beyond that, resistance becomes clinical. So then depression, aggression, dysfunction, then actual crime and physical self-destruction. That part I can't relate to. I don't think I've caused any crimes because I've been struggling to write a paragraph. But the interesting thing is that beyond that, resistance becomes clinical. And so it's sort of like pushing aside the clinical cases of depression and anxiety. It's looking at how much not pursuing what's important to us actually drives us crazy is a really interesting question, and something that's sort of challenging to see an answer to. But I think beyond that, resistance becomes clinical is that if we start to, like I mentioned before around identification, start to actually identify as the procrastinator and the person that doesn't get anything done, and I'm always going to be a loser, and then those build on top of each other, what ends up happening is that, well, why would I even try anything, right? And so this is where that can then lead into becoming clinical in many different ways. So I found that to be quite interesting around what does it actually feel like, and then what's the evolution of not addressing this resistance. What are your thoughts on all that, Sam? What thoughts, comments, anything arise? I see you got something there, Maddie.
No, not really.
Okay. It's like pulling faces like you're smart. What about yourself? Hey?
Pretending I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when the teacher comes over and you try to cheat, you're like, oh.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I didn't have a beard in school. I could have just been like, How about yourself, Barry? Anything come up for you?
Not at the moment. No, I'm not.
Courts?
I can relate to that. That sort of compounding feeling of sort of, in the way that resistance layering on top of each other. That happens. I can say I can relate to that.
Yep, beautiful. The second thing was, funnily enough, when I opened back up my book today, this is what page it opened up to, and then I posted it on Instagram just earlier. But it is one thing to study war and another thing to live the warrior's life. And that was the first page that I opened up to. It's just it's a quote by Telamon of Arcadia, mercenary of the 5th century BC. So that stuck around for a little while. And I found that very interesting. I remember when I was younger and I was walking with my business partner at the time, and he's just under 10 years older than myself. And we were going through some difficulties in the early days of funk. And he said to me then, it's time to start being the quotes that you share on social media. Something I'm paraphrasing there. And what I recognize, and it stuck with me, is that the quotes that I shared, or whatever positivity at the time, or, you know, it's interesting seeing them come up in my Facebook memories nowadays. Realizing that although I was communicating what I thought to be a good message, the difficulty is that I wasn't actually relating with or embodying that message. It was simply just a vehicle of reiterating the same positive message as opposed to actually being it. And maybe I needed to go through some more adversity to be able to understand it, to become it. I'm not too sure. However, there was a difference between simply talking with my head and then talking with my body. And so one thing that I've learned as I've matured is that the content that I share becomes this idea that, do I have an embodiment of what I'm communicating, or is it just simply an idea and something that's worth pulling apart and discussing? So this idea of going, I can share all this, for lack of a better term, positive quotes, but it's actually another thing to live the life of the person that's being, that's living in that embodied way. And the way that I worded it today on social media, once again, I shared this positive quote. But I could post all the quotes I wanted to. It doesn't make me a better person. It doesn't make me the person I'm pointing to just because of what I decide to show the world. What matters most is my integrity to the embodiment of my word. And that was, I worded it in the way that it was talking to me from myself, rather than to anyone else. And that was done deliberately, so that it's like I'm reminding myself what's most important to me isn't what I'm sharing. What's most important to me is that the embodiment and my integrity to that of what I'm sharing. And so that's the unfold. The 4 levels of learning, which we'll go through at the Mood Prep Intensive anyway, which is know of, know about, relate with, and embody. And so previously I knew I was operating at a know of and know about with a lot of that stuff. And later on I learned to relate with and learn to embody some things as well. And so the thing about that for all of us is it takes time. And so when people are like, yeah, no, I know this, it's like, yeah, well, stop knowing it. And to go back to phrases that we used in this conversation today is do the work. Well, how do I do that? How do you do that? It's not helpful. It's like, yeah, I know. Because we're still talking. So, and look, if I can jump in here with Barry, you have a hobby farm on some degree. It's hectares, and you've got wine and all that stuff that you make. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very good. There comes a point where we can't talk anymore. We've got work to do before the sun goes down. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So if I keep on talking, it's like, no, we've got to go do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get that, yeah, definitely get that a lot with people.
Yeah.
There's talk, but pull the finger out and let's achieve something, complete something.
Yep. And so that's one of the things is that maybe areas in our life where we're really good at that, and other areas where maybe we're not running the same pattern. So, and this is one of the things that I can sit and philosophize all day, especially doing it, drinking whiskey, no problem. But the issue is that there's not a lot of work going down at that point, and so that's where one of the biggest things that I've had to lean into was actually living the warrior's life, and to speak to the quote. The interesting thing about living that life is that you don't have to tell people that you're living that life. If I have to tell you that I'm doing that, why am I doing that? It shows it. And so this is interesting. Recently, I had a conversation where somebody goes, well, this person, they took what you said this way. It's like, I don't care. And it's not me being like, well, whatever. It's like, I could ignore someone and they'll take the exact same way. It's like, it's just not my responsibility. I'm not going to lose sleep over somebody interpreting something a particular way that wasn't my intention. And the conversation's over. And so it's interesting, as opposed to, for me, previously, it would have been like, well, now I've got to speak to that person, tell them that wasn't my intention and this and that. It's like, no. It all comes out in the wash. Not to talk about the news of this week either. Any input or questions and thoughts onto that, team?
The original quote that you put out there, it's one thing to study war. Also leans in with me to the curse of knowledge, which is something I picked up many years ago on a different podcast with a different, in a fitness resistance podcast. But when you know stuff, don't expect everyone else to know what you know. And you've got to bring yourself back to the level of a novice or someone who's never done anything before, and perhaps start talking their language. Because as soon as you start throwing a couple of words around that or acronyms around that, you know exactly what they mean.
Mm.
The person you're talking to or trying to support will just turn off.
Yeah.
And they may even think, oh, you're just being a smart ass trying to prove to me what you know and don't really care what I need to know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things, just to add to that, and there's so many things to pull apart about that, but one of the things to add to that was two things, because I like options. One is being able to talk in a way that everyone can consume. So it's also using basic words, right? Basic words to be able to explain things is not talking to basic people. It's just making sure that the person, if they're going to be consuming the information, that it's small chunks of information, so they can bite-sized sort of words, and it's not to simplify it just for the sake of simplifying it. But if there's heaps of complexities, and this is something that can be challenging for the podcast that I have, and that's fair enough. Hence why I have these opportunities to do this in the Facebook group, because it's only when I do the podcast, it's a one-way conversation. But the reality of it is making it consumable. The other thing, which I've spoken to, I think I actually asked you once, Barry. Winston Churchill had a address the nation, Great Britain, I believe, prior to World War, during one of the stages of World War II, in which about going to war and attacking the Germans, or whichever the case might be. And I don't know the exact details. Some history buff might be able to help me out here, but his speech, which I believe was broadcasted on radio, when put through a reader of what level of reading that person is communicating at, people from grade 4 or grade 5 up could understand what he was saying. And so this isn't about I'm talking to basic people. It's about getting a complex topic and making it simple and useful as best as possible to some degree. So, and then in doing that, sometimes you take out the beauty of people making their own meaning, which is another issue. But yeah, great input, Baz.
Cool.
Anyone else?
For me, it's more that quote speaks to, again, like in terms of knowledge, it's continuously studying and taking in information and trying to learn and get better at something, but not actually going out and doing it. I know I'm guilty of that, is that before I do something, I want to be really competent at it. So I'll study and learn and spend my time doing that, but never get to the doing stage.
A little bit of resistance for you.
There we go.
Yeah. I'm glad you have something to bring to next weekend. I'm sure you get to have fun thinking about it on your flight over. What time do you come in Friday morning, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Delicious. Do you have anything to add, Maddie?
I do not.
Delicious. The last page was 108 that I had. Like I said, there's many more. I just wanted to pick 3. And he goes, it's approaching the mystery, sorry. Which I guess is kind of the same thing in many ways, isn't it? Why have I stressed professionalism so heavily in the preceding chapters? Because the most important thing about art is to work. Let me repeat that. Because the most important thing about art is to work. Nothing else matters except sitting down every day and trying. Later on in that chapter, he says, when we sit down each day and do our work, power concentrates around us. The muse takes note of our dedication. She approves. We have earned favor in her sight. When we sit down and work, we will become magnetized, like a magnetized rod that attracts iron fillings. Ideas come, insights accrete. What I call professionalism, someone else might call the artist's code or the warrior's way. It's an attitude of egolessness and service. And so this is, I'm not sure if you guys listened to my podcast with Matty Cooper. And towards the end of it, he talked about he felt selfish around playing for Hands Like Houses and just playing the guitar, like it's not really making a difference. Whereas I think this certain level of him actually moving into his muse really is the most service that he could probably do. And so even though he may not maybe be the person that does all the activism that he wants to, he can simply inspire people that would have a bigger impact than maybe he would anyway. So there's something that often we can miss in that. So I thought that was, once again, probably timely for my situation of writing the book this month. Any input on that, team? Delicious. So moving on to next 2 months, the book of choice. I have one written down here now. Maddie, you actually spoke about something before, so I'd like you to speak to that again. You're reading King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Yeah.
It's a book that I've recommended time and time again. I've had people ask, would they recommend a female to read it? It's like, yeah, absolutely. The female archetypes are queen, mother, wise woman, lover, and a quick Google search, you'll find plenty on it. So, but yeah, what's your experience of reading that book?
So I've only just gone through like the boy psychology side of things. So I haven't read the man psychology. So like the idea of upgrading essentially is how I think of it. Upgrading from boy to man. So like there's a few of my behaviors that I've noticed that I'm still in the boy psychology area where like I didn't think anything of it. Like, not that I think it's a problem, but it's just something that obviously I need to do the work on. So like I said, it was more confronting than I had previously imagined. Like some of the topics that were brought up, and like could see the behaviors that like I would sort of, I don't know, not do on a regular basis in terms of the behavior, but stuff that I can relate to at least, and how it's firmly within boy psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like personally, I felt like I've never felt more like a man in my life. That sounds funny to say that out loud, but I feel like I have upgraded recently. So to then read stuff where I'm like, oh shit, I still have a lot of work to do. It was kind of a slap in the face. And like that's 50 pages into the book. So I've just started reading the man psychology side of things.
Have fun with that.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting book. It's probably time for me to read it again as well. It's probably the only book that I've shared to friends and no family at this stage, that I've had the most personal thank yous is probably the way to think about it. Like people that have contacted me and be like, hey mate, I'm almost finished your book. I just wanted to say thank you. I referred it to a mate of mine, and he's just, I think he's 40, very successful, and he read it 2.5 times in the space of a flight to Melbourne and back. And he was like, it's one of the most confronting and liberating books that he's read. And it's just like, there's a lot of power to it. So that's not the book for next 2 months. It's one that we do recommend though. And Courtney, you spoke about the book Peak, is that correct?
Yeah.
Very good. Can you give us a good insight to that?
So I brought up the little blurb in it. So it's
Blurb that you wrote?
Yeah, I'm going to say I wrote this one. Do a bit of contracting work for Amazon.
Right.
From the world's reigning expert on expertise comes a powerful new approach to mastering almost any skill. And then it sort of goes on to say, have you ever wanted to learn a language or pick up an instrument only to become too daunted by the task at hand? Expert performance guru Anders Ericsson has made a career of studying chess champions, violin virtuosos, star athletics, and memory mavens. Peak condenses 2 decades of original research to introduce an incredibly powerful approach to learning that is fundamentally different from the way people traditionally think about acquiring a skill.
Great. So what either yourself or myself, Courtney, I think we'll do for this next 2 months, we'll put a poll into the Mood Prep group. The 3 books that I'd like to put down. Unless, Barry, have you got any books that come to mind?
Not really. I've got books on, say the obstacle is the way would be one, and then getting into some of Marcus Aurelius stuff. But I think that's a bit too repetitive for Courtney. I think she probably find 2
Barry,
pages.
you've got me figured out already.
Yeah, just don't say it again. Very good. Look, I think obstacle of the way or ego is the enemy. I probably like the former better, but I think that'll definitely be one that we could probably highlight in the coming months for sure. Then the Stoic Alley. Yeah, I'm a big advocate of both those books. I think they're very a great use for sure. I think Mark Manson, so just to clarify on that, his Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, I think he just put out a new book, but Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, I would say is a bit of a bash between Stoicism and NLP, just not dressed up at all like that. So, these people that sort of really enjoy it find that it's just a modern version of some NLP thinking with some Stoicism with a couple of fucks in there.
And going back to keeping language everyone can understand, NLP stands for?
Neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah, which is it's effectively streamed off a lot of a group of different psychologies. So I mean, NLP is a part of what I've learned through the coaching room. The thing with the coaching room is that then they'll do an NLP prac for 8 days, and that's it's called baby prac. Then the master prac and all the mentoring and all the ACMC that you may have heard me mention before. NLP simply is just a part of it, in the same way that gymnastics is a part of fitness. So they use a lot of the human potential movement, positive psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, a couple of different other sort of psychologies, and so that's where they show what coaching is, and then they show a variation of coaching to the difference between coaching and training, consulting, therapy, and advising. So advising actually goes on a consultancy, so there's another one in there. Who's making sticky tape?
It's my wrist brace. It's just getting real sweaty and annoying.
So you had like a Velcro wallet. So yeah, there's your boy psychology.
Yeah. Something I need to upgrade.
Mom! It's pretty funny. So yeah, so I going back onto NLP, it's an educational tool, depending on I think it's challenging when it's sold by itself. It's incomplete. So to give you an example, the levels of consciousness by Ken Wilber, the Enneagram, a lot of the other sort of models that you'll hear me talk about is not NLP at all. So, yeah, indeed. So let's put into the group. We'll put 3 books. Understanding the Enneagram is the book that I'll put forward. I would like to put Wisdom of the Enneagram, but it's a 450-page, not A5 size read. So it's a very thick read, especially difficult to get through 2 months. But I think we can start off with Understanding the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson, King Warrior and Peak, and then we'll put a poll and see what people want to do. So we'll do that this week. Otherwise, moving forward, do you have any questions that you guys bring to the table today around this week's podcast or anything that's come up for you in the last month? This is your opportunity to bring it forward, and we'll probably spend 15 minutes here, and then another 15 minutes, then we'll finish up. Who would like to start? Matthew.
I have nothing to contribute right now.
You've got nothing to bring to the table?
No.
See why I've called it the round table?
Yeah.
So people have things to bring to the table. What about yourself, Courtney?
Probably nothing stuck out hugely for me on the podcast I have listened to this week, but I haven't quite got through them all. So.
Great. And Barry?
Well, yeah, just personally, and I know this is it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I've found this week's podcast really worthwhile. I got something out of probably each one. I can't remember each one, but one I took a few notes on was 279, positive self-talk. I found that quite interesting.
Okay. What were the main takeaways for yourself on that?
I think so. Yeah, some couple of things. When you move into motivation, you can put the question, do we need it? And a couple of words that came up was confidence or esteem. Probably two words that maybe we can use, or I can use as an excuse to not move on.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was just a couple of things I got out of that one. But no, I found it a good week. A week that I could really relate to.
Okay.
Obviously everyone's different, and that's why I don't want to make it too much of it. It was very much, just a personal thing for this week. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's the thing. It's like it's going to be a personal thing, right? And it feeds into one of the concepts that I talked about in the importance of discussion. Excuse me. So the podcast this week, the last 2 weeks, let's go back the last 2 weeks, or whatever this web page will let me have. Let's go back 272, debunking the imposter syndrome, stop attracting, start projecting, how to overcome defeat, 3 lessons in business, controlling control, the dark side of self-development, Matt Cooper with my musings, the importance of discussion, quit positive self-talk, and then understanding life conditions. And there's one of the things that was given up as feedback during the week was at the end of a podcast to be able to give a summary and also a take home. The points being is that the topics can be often quite in depth, right? And I've heard that multiple times. So to try and fit them in 10 minutes can be quite challenging. And so the beautiful thing is that sometimes I don't have a take-home point specifically, because if you look at what's happening with 3 people, and you guys are all at 3 different stages of your life. So we're pulling something apart. Often if I'm giving you a take-home, I got to be very careful not to have my bias on it based on my perception and view of the world.
That's what I was going to say. Is surely the take-home can vary depending on who's listening, depending on what state of mind they're in at that time. Yeah,
absolutely. And so what I'm really cautious of is having some form of an audience that is thinking the way that I'm thinking, because that actually limits my thinking. That's why the idea of shifting to the roundtable as a name, but as a concept, and in the future, I'll ask you guys to just bring something as a quick Q&A or something to the table, so that we're able to pull it apart. Now, I'll always lead the discussions, of course. However, the selfishness of me, which I'm totally fucking in and totally for, is that I want to make sure that I'm leaving these conversations smarter as well. There's no one in this conversation right now. There's no smartest person in the room. It's by no means me, just because we were led here by my podcast. So I'm in these conversations and I'm continually seeking what I can learn and where I can give. And in that case, am I giving for my own ego? Because that's often disguised as being helpful, but it's not actually helpful. It's just often feeding my own ego issues. Or am I giving because it's the right timing and the person asked for it? So it's a really interesting one. It's one of the ones where I don't know if there is a right answer, and sometimes I feel like it's right to summarize, or I feel like it's right to give a take home, but otherwise sometimes I know in doing so I actually stop the other person taking their point of reference to make from it and take it home and make it theirs. So Barry, bringing forward things that are your personal experience is exactly what it's about. And that gives us an opportunity to then go, Dave, what did you mean? Or when you use these words, NLP or this or that, what is it you're referring to? Because somebody else will, that say, for example, has studied NLP through whatever company and may brush someone the wrong way, it could even be me, surprise, then someone else comes and listens and goes, well, that person, this other person's NLP. Like Simon Sinek and Tim Ferriss are both trained in neuro-linguistic programming, among many other things, right? And so Mark Manson has gone and done a lot of Ken Wilber's, work. There's no accident that his book's Orange. His book Orange on the levels of consciousness is the enterprise strive drive meme. That's the place where people move into this, I want to get better. Like that's the color. It's actually the orange meme. So we start to see this map unfold, and it's the ability of self-expression is crucial. Now, if somebody goes, what's my personal takeaway, then I'll have that discussion. Because then I have the opportunity to label it as like, look, my opinion is this. Are you asking for my opinion or my advice? Two different things. So,
yeah.
It's a great input. So what was out of all of that, what was the biggest takeaway for you out of the podcast, Barry, that you got?
I think just those words. The confidence and esteem is more a problem than a positive. Yeah, so that's what I got out of those from the week, and also the being aware of some of the buzzwords like positive self-talk and what's the other one you hear a lot? Oh, self-care.
Mm-hmm.
They can be used as excuses.
Okay.
We can use them as excuses not to do anything or to get out of doing something.
Sure.
Or to avoid.
Yeah. Great. Maddie or Cordy, do you guys have anything that has come up for you and to add to the conversation on the back of that?
Well, could you almost say there that if you're using self-care as an excuse to not do something, is that a form of resistance?
Probably.
And usually not a form of self-care. So that's a perfect example of shadow, right? You'll hear someone go, I'm trying to get better. It's like, yeah, stop trying. Because your trying is keeping you a victim to not being better. So yeah, great pickup, Courtney. You're getting better at this. Must be taking care of yourself. Matty?
What you just said there, like someone saying they're trying, it just reminds me of clients, like particular clients. They're like, oh, I'm trying to do this better. Like, yeah, so, and I just like accept what they say. It's like, oh, they're trying. At least they're trying. If they're doing nothing, then it might be an issue, but they're trying. So just give me a few ideas of what I can do to approach that.
Yeah, would you like to talk to that for a little bit? I'd love to hear your ideas.
I suppose, yeah.
So what would your ideas be around approaching that?
Well, like someone's saying, like, oh, I'm trying to eat better. Like, well, what are you actually doing? I don't know, what are you trying to do? What are you actually doing? I think it's just making the time for the client, because obviously in a group session, my sessions are 45 minutes, so it's pretty much start to finish. It's pretty structured, and there's not much time for anything else. So I sort of let things slide a little bit, like comments like that. I just normally let them slide because there's other things to worry about. But I think it's being more conscious of what they're actually saying and trying to have at least a better response.
Yeah. Yeah, if may I offer something? So one of the things that I've definitely learned, and this heavily comes from my experience, is being able to know when not to say something as well. So it's what should I say, and when is it something that I don't say? So sometimes people will say that so that they get validation of, hey, I'm trying. At least you try. As long as you try, son, you'll be loved. Right? We'll love you no matter what, as long as you give something a good try. And so later on, this person grows up, and they're still falling short of where they want to be, so to speak, inverted commas. And so they turn to the person that's in an authoritative position within that facility and goes, I'm trying, looking for the validation of at least you're trying. And sometimes it's being able to not validate that at all, which is one of the challenges. It's like I'm trying. It's like, well, yeah, you rock up. I assume that you're trying, mate. Here's something else. I had one of the clients here a little while ago, and through any feedback he struggled with, but not as in like he would argue. He would almost feel defeated. And the saying that I picked up really early on, right? And possibly a type 4, so the individualist within the Enneagram. And so what happened was that I learned to preframe and go, look, let's call him, for the sake of it, James. I'm like, James, I want you to understand this. Every single time you come here, I know you give me whatever you can. I would never question that. What I'm asking or what I'm pointing to is this. And he just looked at me and gave me a hug and just fucking went and did it. Right? One of the things was that he wanted to know that knew that he tried. And what I made certain that he understood was that I know that's a presupposition of you rocking up. We're not going to have the discussion again, mate, because I'm not going to keep, and this is what I didn't say, but I'm not going to keep feeding that, good job you're trying, good job you're trying. I know you come here to try. Now it's time to do. Are you ready? And so that's where a lot of the time it's being mindful and being careful of validating the trying. It's just like, look around the room, everyone's trying. Yeah, it's time to do. So it's one of those challenges of some people want to stay in their trying because it's worked for them in the past for what they actually wanted, which was care and attention. But hey, maybe they're just not sticking to their diet. So, great input. Anything else comes up, team? So one of the other things that I wanted to touch on around the summary and the what's it called? Take-home points was this. I'm really conscious of this, sometimes too conscious, but of this ability to be over-responsible and also looking for the under-responsible, right? And so over and under-responsible is what's called a meta program. It can be thought of as a thinking pattern. When working with individuals that aren't familiar with meta programs, I would just call it a thinking pattern, which is basically, as it says, it's a pattern of thinking that person has become accustomed to usually. And so I'm very mindful of this in the gym, but also in the sense of if I'm giving summaries of being over-responsible of what people should take away from it, because I don't know what people should take away from it. This, you look at, for example, you three on the call right now, is that by being able to listen to something, by being able to read the War of Art and do that sort of stuff, you're drawing forward your own understanding and experience. You're creating basically a meme from a collective meme, and meme being a thought or idea that is shared amongst generation. A generation of a meme would actually be, I have a quote that I share with you, and you're the first generation of that quote. Goes back to Dawkins. So the ability to really try and pull and if you're interested, just ask me. Otherwise, what is it you're getting from this podcast, this book, this conversation? Like, what is it? What meaning can I make of this that's going to be useful? And what questions can I ask to understand better? That's both. That will land you in this certain level of healthy responsibility. And funnily enough, it's tied into internal reference and external reference, which is another thinking pattern. So hence, I really encourage this Q&A because it allows us to jump on here and get to the bottom of some stuff that's interesting for you. What questions, comments, and thoughts come up for you guys?
you mentioned asking yourself better questions, and it was something that used to just confuse the shit out of me for ages. I'm like, what the fuck do I ask better questions? Like, what does that mean?
That's not a better question, that's for sure.
Yeah, right? So it took a long time to sort of understand that I didn't need someone else to help me peel away the layers. Like I had the resources there within me. I just needed to figure out the steps to take and the questions to ask, and it just took time to unravel. But yeah, initially it was like one of the most confusing things I'd ever been told. Like, just ask yourself better questions. What? The questions are good enough already? Like, why do I need to ask better questions?
Yeah, Tim Ferriss is fantastic at that. He has, I think, he has a TED talk, or at least a YouTube video on like the 17 questions that changed his life or whatever. It's really worth listening to. Just the twist on the questions are really fantastic. So as Matty searches for it now, you know, one of them, this may not be in those 17, but one of the questions is, what is it you want to get done in the next 5 years, and how can you do that in the next 6 months? So it's just sort of like, well, it can't be done. It's got to be done in 5 years. I paraphrase it. But what it ends up doing is actually not trying to shortcut it. You know, I'm all for the roast rather than the microwave, but it's also then challenging. It's like, doesn't need to take 5 years. Could it be 6 months? If so, what are the ways that I can do that? And so, have you found it there, Matty?
Yeah, it's on his website. It's got the questions, and he goes like, there's a couple paragraphs on each, just like giving some more information about what he means by the question. Yeah, it's just on his blog. I can share it in the group if you want.
Sure, that'd be great. Well, I think I spelled something wrong because I got 17 equations that changed my life.
2 + 2 is 5.
That's pretty funny. No, it's on his blog. Is there a video? Great. Well, team, I think that's all I have written down for now. The only thing that I can add to it is basically we have the Mood Prep Intensive this weekend. We'll have another one in 6 months, I dare say, in around September. So I'll start putting things up for that in the next couple of months. For anyone that's in the coaches circle, soon to be the roundtable, we'll basically get together from Friday from 1 o'clock for a couple of hours, and then from there we'll start with everyone on the Saturday from 9 a.m. and it's looking like we'll actually be at Functional Fitness Australia, not at the unit. Thanks, Matty. But I'll confirm those details anyway. And stay tuned this week. I'll drop some more hints around what we're going to be taking out of the weekend as well. But there'll be some exercises, but there'll be a lot of theory around the concepts and the models that we teach. There has to be that theory, because then the idea is to go away and use those theories in models in real life. The most important thing, and I really want to stress here, is that really bring better questions. Like, you got an opportunity, it's an intensive, it's 2 days, and we'll go for dinner as well. Like, really, unless you don't want to, you want to, you know, full go type 4 introvert and then go for it, but or type 9 maybe. But really bring those questions to get the most out of that weekend. Like squeeze it as best you can. So I challenge you to do so. And, you know, if for whatever reason at home you guys make wine and you want to bring a bottle, then, you know, just do that as well.
Mightn't get through the scanners.
Just got to ask better questions, Barry. Very good. Team, last questions and thoughts, comments on today's call? Delicious. Thank you for your input. I really appreciate it. As soon as I press end on this call, it'll stop my internet anyway. So when I this does it, starts buffering. So like I mentioned before, this call will also go up as a podcast for those that didn't get a chance to listen in, but still want to hear back. And so we'll see how that goes. If it is taken and people want to keep listening to it, then I'll just keep doing that each month. Otherwise, team, that's it. We're done. Until next time. Eat some pizza. Indeed. Now, just the last thing I will say, anyone that's still listening, if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them in the group. Jump on Facebook, search Mood Prep Online, and drop them underneath this either actually standalone comments or drop them underneath the video. Otherwise, guys, yes, until next time, peace and pizza. Kick today in the dick. Not too hard. It's a Sunday. Otherwise, slay the dragon or let him chill out until tomorrow. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.